Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Views and News, and I'm Faisal Rehman live from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about the IMF Executive Board that has approved the revival of EFF for Pakistan. So we will be receiving the 7th and the 8th tranche, and that is going to be around $1.17 billion. Obviously, that is going to give a lot of support to the economy of Pakistan. As we just mentioned that today, rupee gained around 3%, 3 rupees against dollar. And interestingly, this is the time when dollar is getting strengthened in the international market. So technically, impact is much more than that. But as far as our stock market is concerned, it wasn't that bullish, I would say, perhaps because of the impact of the floods all over Pakistan. Whether you talk about KP, you talk about the northern areas, Gilgit-Baltistan, Punjab, Balochistan or Sindh. I think this is the worst calamity that Pakistan is going through at the moment as we speak. Yes, 2010 floods were huge. We call them the super floods, but I think this is a mega super flood. Currently, Pakistan is under a lot of problem, a lot of pressure as well. Either when you talk about the 2005 October earthquake that destroyed Kashmir and the northern areas in Pakistan, I still remember we ended up getting around $7.6 billion. That was a lot of money, but again, was it spent wisely? Perhaps center had the control on that money, and that was indeed a huge problem, because I believe it should be done at the city level, at the district level. That is how you need to know what exactly is going on in Pakistan. Now, the interesting part is that since these floods are huge, the impact on our economy is going to be tremendous as well. Whether you talk about the agriculture sector or the livestock sector for that matter, the livelihood has been lost. And you are practically talking about 33 million people. Just imagine, look at the number who are affected because of these floods. Their businesses have been swept away, their houses, you name it, and they have lost everything. Now, what needs to be done? Whether this money is going to be enough that has been pledged, or it is going to be a continuous process, because when you talk about rescue, you talk about relief efforts, then comes the rehab and the reconstruction and so and so forth. Let's see how the government of Pakistan manages to deal with this problem. Today I was also listening to the various ambassadors, and they were pledging money as well. The foreign minister was there, the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, Hina Ramani Khar, was there along with senior officials. Mr. Iqbal was there as well. And they were trying to tell the global community what exactly has happened. And I'm sure we'll be able to muster some sort of support to get out of this particular problem. Before I introduce you to our guests, our production team has prepared a report regarding the IMF package. Let's watch it first.
Pakistan, which is currently fighting with one of the worst natural calamity in the history, which has claimed over 1,000 lives and billions of monetary losses in the realm of destructed infrastructure, including bridges, shops, roads, as well as the livestock animals, found a slight relief and a hope that now the calamity-affected people can get a real relief and rehabilitation by the government of Pakistan, as the economic team of Pakistan, under the leadership of Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and guidance of Finance Minister Miftah Ismail, finally succeeded in making the Executive Board of International Monetary Fund convinced regarding approval of the revival of Pakistan's Extended Fund Facility program. The IMF in the statement said that Executive Board of the International Monetary Fund completed the combined 7th and 8th reviews under the Extended Fund Facility for Pakistan. The statement added that the immediate priority is to continue the steadfast implementation of the recently approved budget for the fiscal year 2023, adherence to a market-determined exchange rate, and pursuit of a proactive and prudent monetary policy. On the other hand, the statement said that it is also important to continue to expand social safety to protect the most vulnerable and accelerate structural reforms, including improving the performance of state-owned enterprises and governance. Finance Minister Miftah Ismail said that now Pakistan would get 7th and 8th tranche of $1.17 billion. He thanked the Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif for taking so many tough decisions which saved Pakistan from the default. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has termed the revival of the IMF program as a positive development for Pakistan's economy and appreciated the efforts of Finance Minister Miftah Ismail and his economic team for revival of this program.
Now, to talk about this, let me quickly introduce you to our panelists. In the studio, we have with us Ali Salman. He is the Executive Director of Prime Institute. Thank you very much, Salman Sahab, for your availability. And we'll be talking to Dr. Aqdas Afzal, Senior Economist, joined us on Skype. Thank you very much, Dr. Saab, for your presence as well. And we'll also be talking to Anwar Iqbal Saab. He's going to join us on telephone from Washington, D.C. But let me put the first question to Ali Salman. Ali Saab, much awaited, but finally it's been approved, talking about the 7th and the 8th tranche of the IMF program. 1.17 billion. Well, dollar obviously is getting a lot stronger in the international market, but perhaps rupee seemed to be pretty positive as well. Gained 3 rupees against the dollar in today's trading. Stock market wasn't very bullish, as I earlier mentioned, primarily because of the floods. Now, sir, IMF program on one side with all the conditions associated, and the current flood situation, according to SN Iqbal Saab, the infrastructure that has been destroyed will require around $10 billion to be back to normal. Now, sir, $10 billion you're talking about. I mean, in addition to the already existing problems that we had. So what is that supposed to mean?
So I think let's put the IMF program in the context first of all. We know that the discussion about the IMF revival program was in progress for last several months since this government took over, and we also know that the program was practically suspended for a longer time period. And we should definitely welcome the revival of the IMF program, and I think it's a good news in when Pakistan's economy really needed such a good news. And this program revival should not just be looked at in the terms of the dollar's value, but I think largely as a symbol, I would say, of confidence of international financial institutions. And we hope that
perception, basically.
Perception, but also I think the commitment and the credibility. Because if you look at the IMF program, and if you look at this is not just a one-way document. It's a commitment which the government of Pakistan has provided to the international financial institution to carry out certain reforms following it. And certainly, I mean, the flood situation is going to take a toll on all of us, on the government revenues and on the development efforts. But I think that the program must continue. And government should continue and honor the commitments. However, you mentioned about the development aspect. For instance, you mentioned about the $10 billion infrastructure loss. Honestly, I have not looked at the numbers and would like to know more details about it. But I was just doing a back of envelope calculation. For instance, if you just consider the private loss versus public infrastructure loss. So if you think about the private loss, I think I estimate that it is about $2.5 billion already, which is the livestock loss and the house is destroyed. So if the government were to reinvest, and especially livestock is 50% of Pakistan's rural economy, but the livestock loss is still a very small portion, by the way. The total livestock population in Pakistan is 123 million. And out of that we have lost about 1 million. So the numbers have to be put in a realistic context, because only then our appeals can be given more credibility. And also since we have experience of getting international aid during disasters, I think a lot more needs to be added, a lot more need to be done in terms of transparency. When it comes to attracting international donors. And that is, I think, the government's responsibility to ensure that the appeals are realistic and disbursement is transparent.
Because, interestingly, normally there isn't much coverage about Pakistani stories in the international or perhaps in the Western media, in particular CNN. But a lot of coverage regarding these floods was there on CNN. Their correspondents, few sitting in Hong Kong and reporting from there, few in Islamabad. And you were talking about the entire Pakistan. You're talking about from the northern tip all the way down into Sindh, Balochistan, Punjab, KP, and it's right in front of us what's going on. And tourism perhaps was really picking up well in certain areas like Swat. but since the infrastructure is gone, I mean, I was surprised to see those visuals when those huge hotels were swept away like anything, and was very surprising. I think we really need to
put
look
in
into
a bigger context, and we need to see, I mean, of course the visuals are very effective, but I would like to see greater details about, you know, the damage done.
I think that is going to take another few weeks.
Yeah, that's
by the
right,
time this water level settles down and water recedes, we'll be able to exactly understand what has happened and what is the magnitude of this disaster. But let me also bring in now Dr. Aqdas Afzal Saab, Senior Economist. Sir, if I may ask you this question, Dr. Saab, that what sort of an impact is going to have because of this particular deal? As Ali Salman just mentioned, that it is not about the money, the $1.2 billion. Obviously, that is going to have a positive impact, but the credibility of Pakistan, that matters more. Your take?
Thank you very much, Faisal. It's my pleasure to be on your show once again. I agree with Ali Salman's analysis. I think that this the tranche or the reinitiation of the IMF program is definitely a shot in the arm for Pakistan's economy that had been reeling in the wake of massive inflation, especially as it came about with the start of hostilities between Ukraine and Russia. And I think because of this reinitiation or bringing this program back online, fears emanating from certain quarters that Pakistan might be heading in the direction of Sri Lanka, I think those fears can now be put to rest. And I think in the immediate short term, you know, prior to when we were impacted by these really awful and probably the worst floods in Pakistan's history, I think Pakistan had probably been going towards economic stabilization. So I think there is a lot of importance attached to bringing this program back online, because this program has given us the lifeline to avoid default in the short term. But like I said, you know, with these recent floods, all these calculations, the economic and the fiscal frameworks that had been agreed between the Pakistani government and the IMF, they are now largely irrelevant, because I was looking at some numbers from the previous super floods in 2010, if you may remember, and I was looking at the needs and demand assessment that was carried out jointly between the ADB and the World Bank, and it took about a year to complete. And if we go about, if we go about looking at those calculations and then just extrapolate based on the number of people who have been impacted, so according to the needs and demand assessment of ADB and World Bank in 2010-11, about 20 million people were impacted. Now we are hearing that about 33 million people have been impacted. So just like what Ali mentioned, back of the envelope calculation, that's a 65% increase in the impact. So based on this very rough calculation, because you know nothing is final until proper comprehensive needs assessment has been finished at the ground level, but just back of the envelope calculation, we can see that Pakistan is going to need anywhere between 11 to 15 billion dollars just for covering the direct and the indirect damage that has taken place because of these floods. So just a very quick recap of what has happened. I mean, like Ali mentioned, we have lost almost 1 million in terms of livestock. About 600,000 homes have been damaged or destroyed. 2 million acres worth of cropland has come underwater, and about 150 bridges have been swept away, while 18,000 schools have been destroyed. Now, this is a very serious impact, and I think the reconstruction is going to take a number of years. But I think my concern is Pakistan's economy in the medium term, because these floods are going to impact Pakistan's economy in a very substantial way in the medium term. For example, all calculations about economic growth, which are at 3.5 to 4% per annum, I think we need to revisit those numbers, because I think Pakistan is probably going to enter.
Well, Dr. Saab, what sort of an impact? Because I remember, whether you talk about the earthquake or you talk about the previous floods of 2010, they damaged everything. I mean, we all know what we went through. But a lot of money came in. The money was pouring in like anything. I remember during the 2005 earthquakes, and everybody pledged. And we ended up getting over $7 billion. Now, this time, sir, whatever has happened, I mean, we'll get to know in a few weeks' time exactly about the losses. But what sort of an impact as far as GDP is concerned? Because, sir, if you look at the numbers, there is global recession that is going to be there for sure. Then you are looking at the revised number because of various reasons. But, sir, we were not expecting these floods. Now, since they have come, they have done the damage. In terms of percentage, do you think it is going to impact over 1% as far as GDP growth is concerned, or perhaps more?
It's going to impact substantially more than 1%, in my opinion.
Okay.
The previous floods of 2010, they impacted, about 5 to 6% of GDP. So if we go by, those calculations, I think in terms of GDP, the impact is going to be very substantial, but that is also going to impact our economic growth numbers. So I think from 3.5...
In particular, sir, when we talk about the agricultural sector, agriculture sector has been consistently going down, because I remember there was a time when it had around 28% of its weightage in the GDP growth. It further declined, and now it's around 21.5%. I mean, according to various figures. But what I'm saying is that, sir, because a lot of people believe that most of this kharif crop that has been destroyed, whether you talk about cotton, you talk about rice, you talk about even the land. Now, perhaps in a few weeks' time, we'll get to know exactly what sort of measures do we need to undertake in order to prepare the land for the next season. Do you think we have enough time to do so, or again, because 4 million tons of shortage as far as wheat is concerned, we are looking at importing it. The further damages that have occurred is going to put more pressure on the import side,
absolutely.
Sir?
Oh, absolutely. I think we are definitely going to, this is definitely going to put more pressure on the external account. And I think, like I mentioned previously to you, Faisal Saab, all our calculations and assumptions about the way economy is going to be moving forward this year, they have now largely become irrelevant. So I think we need to go back to the drawing board in order to make that assessment.
So quick comment, and then we've been also joined in by Anwar Iqbal from
just
Washington.
Just a quick additional point to what Aqdas was saying. I think it is important to revisit our PSDP right now, and revisit our priorities. And in my opinion, government actually should stop the current allocation of PSDP and give the top priority to rehabilitation of the flood affected areas, both in terms of the property but also in terms of the infrastructure. That is where I think the role of interprovincial coordination, the role of NSC,
that is something so important. We'll definitely talk about it, but let me quickly have a word with Anwar Iqbal Saab. Anwar Saab, Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, Janab.
Sir, good to have you in the program, sir. Anwar Saab, first of all, since, sir, we are doing this program primarily on the floods impact as far as economy is concerned. But sir, prior to that, since IMF has said that they will be releasing the 7th and the 8th tranche of IMF program, and that is around $1.17 billion. So technically speaking, this isn't a huge amount. But my friends over here, they believe that this is more about the perception and the image of Pakistan, perhaps about the credibility. Your take on this particular point, sir?
Yeah, it is actually. It is the IMF matters because of its endorsement. You need your endorsement to stay relevant in the market. Once the IMF and the World Bank endorse you, then people take you as a less risky customer. You see, otherwise, like if you go to international banks and if you go to the commercial market without that, the IMF or the World Bank's endorsement, then people will be reluctant. They will always charge you more interest. And besides, taking loans from commercial banks is not a good thing. But once you have this endorsement, then you not only get support from the World Bank and the IMF, but also and the ADB, which is Asian Development Bank, but you also get into bilateral arrangements with what do you say, with friendly countries. And according to what we have been hearing in Washington, that Pakistan has lined up to $37 billion of loans and investments in Pakistan in the near future, and those arrangements have been made with Saudi Arabia, with UAE, with Qatar, and other countries. And all those countries, they were willing to give money. It was a very interesting situation. What the IMF was saying is, okay, we will endorse you, but first you have to have pledges that you have bilateral arrangements with others. And those that we spoke to, the countries that we had bilateral arrangements with, they were saying that, yes, we will give you money, but first you have to have IMF's endorsement. So ultimately, Pakistan got that endorsement, and now those monies will be released. I think we will be in now, will again be able to rebuild, or rather start rebuilding our economy. But that should not make us complacent, because that does not really take our economy out of trouble. We're still in as much trouble as we were before, or even worse because of the flood. But even if we do not count this flood, we still have a deficit economy. So we need to do something about that. We need to increase our exports. We need to increase our taxes and everything. And then, of course, we have to deal with this flood, which has done a huge damage to the economy as well.
So, since you are in the United States of America, the most influential country in the world, and whether you talk about the FATF, they have their influence. You talk about United Nations, they can alter things. You talk about IMF, perhaps another very strong financial institute that really listens to the Americans. Now, since we are restoring our, the overall engagement with the Americans, do you think that in the coming days, in the coming weeks, America is going to really help Pakistan in fetching a certain amount of money that is really desired in order to look after the affairs, because whatever has happened during these floods, that needs to be fixed as well.
Well, we are not going to have the type of relationship that we had before 2011, or right after 9/11, or during the Afghan war in the 80s. You see, because the situation has changed. But during the last 10 years or so, when we went through a difficult period, there has been a realization in Washington that Pakistan is an important country, and they do want to have some sort of relationship with Pakistan as well. So I think, yes, there will be an improvement in relations, but we are not going back to the 80s.
All right, thank you very much, Anwar Iqbal Saab, for your comments. Now coming to you, Ali Salman Saab, a very interesting analysis. When you look at Pakistan, I was going through an article, and very interesting analysis were perhaps drawn within the first 2, 3, 4 paragraphs. You know what it said? It said because of the geostrategic location of Pakistan, Pakistan cannot default. And then there were few reasons for that also. But so this is a blessing in disguise, unfortunately, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we have in the past, our strategy, or I would say even economic strategy, has been largely driven by this belief that our location is of critical importance to the region and to world powers. And that has actually it has done to our economic strategy, that it has taken away our attention of the potential which Pakistan society, which Pakistan's own private economy, people, enterprises, entrepreneurs have. And we have looked outside because somehow we are driven by this geostrategic importance perception. I mean, this is true, and we can't choose our geography, and we can't choose our neighbors. So we are where we are. But I think we definitely need to take ourselves out from this perception now, and focus on the issues and the challenges. And if you, for instance, we have been in this context of the floods. You must have seen those images. For instance, we need more helicopters who could more be deployed in the rescue operation. Yes, we have helicopters, let's say, in the defense sector, but maybe those helicopters are not well suited for rescue operation, for rehabilitation operations, where we actually need to divert more resources. So if you just look at this example of floods and where we need to give more resources, I think this explains that what we need to change. And these natural disasters are unfortunately offers us a stark reminder, and this is not a very pleasant reminder of how we need to reallocate our resources.
I remember in the year 2005, post this very, very unfortunate incident, the earthquake,
Yes.
8th October, American Chinooks, we had helicopters coming in from South Africa, medical teams from Turkey, Cuba, you name it.
Yes.
I mean, the rescue and relief was at its optimum
Yeah.
level. Still, sir, many people were not finally compensated, even after 17, 18 years. Now, that was only in a certain area, as big as Switzerland, perhaps. This is all over Pakistan.
Let me just offer a different view here, Faisal, and I'm very keen to learn more, and when more data sinks in. Half of Pakistan's, of course, is Balochistan, and in terms of the area, a little bit more than half, perhaps. But only 5% of Pakistan's population is in Balochistan. So we have to look at the overall picture in terms of the damage done. I'm not trying to underestimate the damage done, but at the same time, I think I don't want to be led just by visuals. I want to
Visuals
see
are scary. Seeing
visuals
is
are
believing.
scary. But we need to look at the data. For instance, look at our major urban centers. Right? So we have 40 to 50% population in major urban centers of the country, right? And fortunately, by God's grace, none of our major urban centers have been affected by these floods, right? And so we need to see where the damage has been done, and we need to localize our response accordingly. We can't just have a top center, like top-down approach to manage this problem. We have to see what, for instance, the zoning issues, for instance, how the buildings were built along the riverside. So that is something.
Encroachment perhaps is the problem.
Encroachment. People should not be allowed to build houses there, and government has vast free lands, and those people should be encouraged to given free land and help to rebuild their houses.
I think there's
and
a
better
lot
houses, by the way.
which depends on the government, whether you're talking about the provincial government,
Yeah.
district government, or the federal government.
That's right,
I think
yeah.
there has to be a proper synchronization. There has to be a proper element of synergy.
Which is missing. Which is missing.
is-
I think, let me also say something like on the political, or let's say on the national level, the Prime Minister called for an APC. It may be seen positively, but I think there was no need of calling APC right now. We need an NEC meeting right now, the National Economic Council. We need the Prime Minister
Yeah.
to call all
One
the
has
Chief Minister.
to take into account
and-
everything, and then
And this
deliver on war footing.
NAC needs to actually really function, and I'm very sure that despite of the political differences we have on the parties,
I think
when
that
you call the
those differences
governments,
should be kept aside for the moment.
and-
They
and
can always
all
have the
the
debate on
governments,
that,
all the-
but this is the first priority.
the federal
sir.
government and the provincial governments have to work in synchronization.
Absolutely.
Right now, we are not seeing that.
Absolutely. Now, coming to you, Dr. Aqdas Afzal Saab. Obviously, sir, we are going through a lot of financial crunch, and country is already suffering from economic crisis, even before the floods. Now the floods have come. Now Pakistan, though we have the lowest footprint as far as carbon is concerned, now we really should blame the Western world, countries like USA or perhaps China, the countries which emit the maximum amount of carbon. And interestingly, sir, we are among those countries, or perhaps again the geographic location comes into play, that will get affected the most. Among the top 6 countries, Pakistan is there. But having said that, sir, this is not going to be a one-time problem. This is going to be a constant phenomena. So you can't fight the nature. As we have seen, whosoever encroached and built $1 million sort of hotels there, they were all washed away, because water, there's a national course. It will make its own way. And this is exactly what has happened, sir. It eroded everything, it washed away everything and took everything along. Look at those boulders, which normally we end up seeing in movies, that was a reality. I mean, I've never ever seen flash floods of that sort, sir. But this is a reality. Sir, we do not learn, unfortunately, whether we talk about the earthquake incident or the floods or otherwise, encroachment and, what we call in Urdu do numberi, that is a very regular phenomenon, unfortunately. So don't you think, I mean, when we talk about the economic reforms or structural reforms because of IMF and other countries, we also really need to look into what we are up to, and we need to put our own house in order. For example, that, like in Islamabad, you can't build buildings all along the Kashmir highway. You have to have a certain distance between the colony and the main road, though there is no river here. Even over there, sir, people had constructed almost inside the river, sir, because just to have a great view and have a cup of tea and water is flowing right under the terrace where you're sitting.
Sure. Faisal Saab, I think that's a very, very good point that you have raised. Yes, Pakistan is at the forefront of the damages or all the bad stuff that comes from climate change. And yes, there is an issue of climate justice because our contribution to carbon monoxide or other greenhouse gases that bring about climate change is negligible because, we haven't had that kind of economic growth or fossil fuel usage. But having said that, I think the point that you have brought into this discussion is a very important one because, look, when these floods have taken place and the kind of damages that we are now seeing also highlights the absence of many things that could have been available despite the climate change that is going on in our entire globe. For example, there was a complete lack of early warning systems. Then you bring up this idea of encroachments, climate change happening in the planet is not stopping us from stopping these encroachments. So, and then Ali's point about not having equipment like choppers and helicopters that could bring about all these relief and rescue operations. So all these points point towards the fact that yes, there is an issue coming in the shape of climate change and Pakistan is bearing the brunt of that, but our preparedness, what we have done about it is really, really lacking when it comes to all these different things that we have to do. And I think this should be a wake-up call because the way monsoon patterns are changing in this part of the world, the way climate change is continuing unabated, I think this is not going to be a one-off. Unfortunately, we are going to see more and more of these events. And I think now is the time to invest primarily in local governments. And this is a point that I think Ali Tawqir Sheikh made a few days ago in another program. And I think he's completely right when he says that, the extent and magnitude of damage that we are observing in the wake of these floods has to do with the absence of local governments. So I think that has been a key, how should I say, a gap that has not been looked at until now. And I think this should be a wake-up call, and this should propel and compel our policymakers to look into making Pakistani societies and communities more economically, socially, and politically resilient to such climate change disasters, because this is unfortunately something that we are going to see more of in the days, years, and decades to come.
I totally agree with you on that, sir. But interestingly, our Minister for Planning, Dr. Iqbal, said that it might take 5 years to rebuild and rehabilitate the nation. 5 years. So perhaps you're looking at the next term of whosoever comes into power. They'll be fully engaged with all what is happening. And there is a huge possibility, perhaps it is a reality, that there's going to be the word acute was used, acute shortage of fruit and vegetables. So during the last 3 days, the prices of onion, tomatoes, they almost tripled, because we all know that come from Sindh and Balochistan. So is the case with the infrastructure, because there were so many consignments coming in from various places, talking because even prior to the floods, we had never had a proper infrastructure, as far as vegetable, transportation is concerned. So we end up losing around 52%. Alisa, please correct me if I'm wrong. 50%, let's put it this way. The fruit and the vegetable, because we do not have the storage facility. There is no concept of value addition either. And this onion and tomato is the basic produce, which we really need to have in our kitchen to cook anything. Now, sir, if there is shortage, and then again, Miftah Ismail Sab, the finance minister, says that we will be importing it from the arch rival India. So, sir, again, back to square one. Import. I mean, that is something of prime concern. Wheat, perhaps, is going to be another problem.
Yes.
And looking at the current issue between the not the issue, it's a full-fledged war between the Russians and Ukrainians. Look at the grain prices. They have skyrocketed, sir.
Commodity prices skyrocketed, and I think they have since been coming down. But this is no guarantee that there are not going to be any additional spikes, especially as winter is now approaching all over Europe and in Russia and all these places. So I think this challenge that we are now facing in the shape of floods against the backdrop of an economy that is not completely out of the woods, I think it is going to take a lot of acumen on the part of our policymakers to, steer through these so many different challenges, these existential challenges that somehow keep coming in Pakistan's direction. And I think you're absolutely right when you mention that onions and tomatoes, which form the very base of Pakistani cuisine, prices have shot up, and I think prices are going to remain elevated in the months to come, and this is going to create many
and also perhaps looking at the current inflation, sir, and the kind of pressure people are in because of the electricity prices and so many things put together.
Absolutely. So I think this has the recipe, unfortunately, of turning into a proverbial perfect storm for Pakistan. These prices, this massive inflation, unending, unabating inflation could very well turn into social unrest, which could further exacerbate our economic situation, and this could all turn into a cycle.
Yeah. Ali Salman.
I think it is right that we will experience the heightened inflation if we don't take the countermeasures, and obviously the new crop will take at least 3 months. But in the short term, and as they say that no crisis should be waste, every crisis offers an opportunity. If we open Wagah border, as it used to be open before 2016, and if you recall, the prices of onions and the tomatoes and many other vegetables which we used to import through Wagah border were actually reasonably stabilized because trade offers this opportunity to farmers and consumers on both sides of the border.
And what the prices are these days of onion and tomatoes?
This should be
400 to 500
I know, I have bought it myself.
Just imagine.
Exactly. And so this is the short-term solution, but this should be maintained across the border. And this is where we probably need to go.
One more comment I want you to, in fact, really throw light on is, now, so when we talk about the river banks, obviously when the rivers will, and swollen rivers means that there are no banks. Like the visuals that we were going through of Kabul and Sindh, I mean, we had no clue, honestly speaking, where the bank is, because it's just water. Somebody sent me a picture from a helicopter, Lisbela. Honestly, just a few houses and it was water everywhere. You talk about Nasirabad, you talk about Jafarabad, I mean, just areas along with Sindh and Balochistan. DG Khan, DI Khan, I mean, all over except for the slightly, inward and those districts which were away from the rivers primarily. The floods, they are still there, so another spell most likely is going to be there in the coming days. I hope it doesn't come. But what I'm saying is that, sir, you do not have any control over the nature. Don't you think, sir, like in the 2005 earthquake, when we went through all that, because a lot of people died because of these lenters and the weight of it when it fell, even in the schools and otherwise in houses, a lot of houses just went down. So we learned, I think, that there has to be a different nature of
Sorry,
construction.
I'm interrupting you, Faisal, here. But when we were mentioning nature and how we cannot control it, I'm reminded of my time in Netherlands.
So that's a different ball. I mean, these people
like
have mastered the art of making canals and
so
even saying no to the sea.
They are human beings. They have
Rotterdam,
learned
look at that.
technology. They are like historically, it's like low-lying country, and how they have built and created new cities from the seas. So I think it's a question of the design. It's a question of allocation of resources. It's a question of putting the right.
It's a question
money.
of will.
It's a question of will. It's yes. I mean, nature has its challenges, but then all over the world, the countries have learned to live alongside the rivers. Actually, then the most beautiful cities are still like in Europe, in US, are alongside the river. We don't have such places. We don't. Our cities are like away from the rivers most of the time, because we haven't really managed the river banks. We haven't really managed our water canal systems in that fashion. We have not looked at that aspect. So yes, I think nature offers challenges, but also then the human being.
There are opportunities there as well. But anyway, sir, thank you very much, Salman, for your participation. I would also like to thank Dr. Aqdas for your presence as well. And that's all we have for this hour. But in the coming days, in the coming weeks also, we'll be doing a lot of programs from the field. What exactly has happened in those areas, and what exactly those people are going through as we speak, what sort of need they have, and obviously what can we do in order to facilitate them. So most likely we'll be covering all over Pakistan, and you'll be seeing us there instead of sitting in the studio and talking about it. Anyway, I'll see you again. Till then, you take good care of yourself. Khuda Hafiz.